Housed at the Hexagram Institute at Hexagram Concordia. We do three things actually. We develop technologies with scientific collaborators. We take those technologies and develop artistic projects that tour internationally utilizing them, and we also critically reflect on those technologies and those projects through writing and research. The interest is in sensor-based environments, interactive spaces that go across four areas: performance, the media arts, sound, and increasingly architecture. And there's four thematics that we're interested in. The first is, and it's coming very slowly, the body, space and time, perception and technology. In particular, how analog and digital technologies transform these three areas: the body, our sense of space, our sense of time, and our sense of bodily and sensory perception. Okay, so I'm going to talk about three projects tonight. The first is a project called Air XY, that's coming as well, which deals with the languages of design in public space. The second is J&D, dealing with sensory perception. And the third is a technology research project with McGill University called SenseStage, which is to develop open source wireless sensing technologies for artists, designers, and architects. The first projects I'm going to talk about tonight are projects that deal with the languages of design and how they shape public space. I'm working with a collaborator for a long time, Eric Edegard, based in San Francisco, madxs.com. He did all the early work for Wired magazine, and he's very interested in how icon systems, information architectures actually shape public space and our perception of public space. And we've done a number of projects that exploit that. The first was in 2002, commissioned by the Parc de la Villette in Paris, called Chronopolis, which was a 15 by 15 meter projected clock, which uses, again, the kind of language of design running in real time and affected by the population of visitors who pass over the surface, basically morphing time from a standard mechanical time to a more quick accelerated time. The second was a project done at Pearson International in Toronto, and in Second Life, two non-spaces, which dealt with creating a computer model of the actual airport and then a virtual, and then basically the real experience of being in that actual airport and moving back and forth between those two spaces. And the third project was a commission from the last Venice Architecture Biennale in 2008, along with people like Diller Ernst's video, Greg Lynn, Frank Gehry, called Himmelblau, called Air XY, which dealt with the question of how do new kinds of hidden technical systems shape our perception of space. How do things like Google Maps and Google Earth and iPhones and all that basically shape our experience of space? So we basically created a 30-foot-long screen bent in the middle, which was a real-time clock, also looked like a machine, a kind of interface, kind of desktop that basically was running in real time. It basically, you have across the surface these kind of very weird maps, again, all these information maps, things culled from the internet dealing with systems, biological systems, technical systems, and then you see these green kind of floating icons. These are like markers, urban markers, that increasingly take on more and more behaviors. They start to fly across the screen as people encounter the screen, as they get close to it. And as they get close to the surface, they're captured in real time, they're tracked and surveilled as half blobs and half bodies across the surface, and these icons essentially engulf these spectators, surrounding them by the kind of languages of icons and design. And then, when the spectators went away from the surface and went into the back, they encountered a completely different space. They encountered an air space, a space where those icons they saw in the front are suddenly projected onto the ground, growing from 1 pixel to 9 feet in diameter, and basically with fog creating essentially an ephemeral architecture which would appear and disappear. So the icons grow from this 2D screen to the spaces that surround our bodies. A new project that we're deals very much with the question of sensory systems, and this goes from the Air XY work. This is called Just Noticeable Difference. It deals very much with the perceptual thresholds of all of our senses, of proprioception, of hearing, of touch, of sight, of sound, of smell, and how you can play with those at just noticeable differences, the places where we barely notice the changes of those things occurring. What we're doing is building essentially a 9-foot tall box. One person goes in at a time for between 5 and 15 minutes. We are able to look at the behavior of how people move in this room, and that influences a whole series of behaviors, of sound, of light, of heat, of touch, at these just noticeable differences. And technically, as I said, we're interested in how do we develop tools to facilitate these environments, not only for us, but for also architects, designers, and artists who are interested in these new kinds of sensed spaces. And so we've developed a project with McGill, the interface design and music interaction laboratory in the Department of Music called SenseStage. What this deals with is basically a low-cost, open-source, wireless sensor and hardware network that uses software and hardware. We have transmission boards that basically can connect sensors to. You can have hundreds of those in a room that basically take all sorts of sensor data, whether that's temperature, environmental factors, movement, pressure. That's sent to a series of open source tools which are in software that enable basically artists and designers to get access to all of that real-time data. Imagine you have hundreds and hundreds of channels of sensor data. What do you do with that? How do you access that? Well, now it's possible through the kinds of tools we're developing. So architects or designers want to change spaces into things that change based on people moving through them, based on traffic, based on all these kinds of complex factors. And this data network enables the basic sharing of that data across a network. So we have tools that enable artists and designers to connect to that server to get all that real-time data and then to start to compose with it. What do you do with all that real-time data? What do you do in terms of shaping sound, image, light, all of these things? And then the project is right now being used by artists around in various places. It's being used up in a project called Arctic Perspective by Marco Pelian up in Nunavut. It was used in India in a project we did. It's been used at the University of Manitoba, and architecture is also being used on a boat floating around in the North Sea called Marin, which is an EU-sponsored project. That's the end. Here are the URLs. I just want to thank all my collaborators who make this work possible. Good night.